Good. All right, guys. Good to see you. Uh-oh, I gotta hook this other part up. Welcome to family group. Is that where everyone thought they were? Yeah. No one thought they were like at a PTA meeting or anything? Like someone go over the favor to the PTA? So it's a family recovery group meant to provide information, education, support for family members, spouses, parents, brothers, sisters, friends even, anyone who has somebody that they care about dealing with substance use, all right? So that's the idea of this group. Whole lot of information, a whole lot of education, no bad questions. Anything that you want to talk about, you should let me know. We can go there. We can kind of get it figured out the best we can. I usually go over some basics because a lot of times we have new folks in here, and if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to do that again. Is that cool? Sure. I know a lot of you have heard it, but I try to say it differently every time. But at a certain point in time, it just is what it is, right? The brain changes, things happen, and the person moves from having some fun, doing this for the heck of it, doing this because his friends are doing it because it's there, it's a cool thing to do, to something else. And that's what we'll talk about. We'll talk about the process of that. Talk a little bit about how to identify that and work through that. But at the same time, I'm very open to other ideas or other topics. So before I take off on that topic, does anybody have any burning desires or issues or anything that they're dealing with that they want to talk about tonight? Do they have any questions? Is there anything puzzling you related to what you have going on?
I'm Barbara.
Hey, Barbara.
And I don't know if this will work or not for you, but I grew up I'm an adult child of alcoholics. Mm-hmm. And my sister died of alcoholism, my mom died from it. And the whole time I was growing up, and some of you might have this, you live in an atmosphere that you ignore it. It's like it's not going on, mm-hmm. which is strange for some people to think that could be possible, but it really was. It was just a whole lifetime of denial. And I am an alcoholic. So I have gone through, I'm going to be 4 years sober here shortly, but I live with an alcoholic. Mm. And I've been working on myself for like 4 years, so I had a distraction there where I was like, okay, you have your problem, but I'm going to work on my problem. So now it's starting to bug me. And my question, I guess what I'm dealing with now is it okay to live that way and let the person just go on with their life and be an addict and whatever happens on that side of the house, I have the insane ability to be able to just ignore it.
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
Because of the way I grew up. So I'm kind of looking at, is that okay?
So the first thing is it's absolutely okay if that's where you want to go. Uh-huh. So 100% it's okay. Carol, if you give me a cup of coffee, I'll give you $153,000.
Y'all heard that? Yeah.
So, and I think everybody in here should apply this to their just black coffee. I think everybody in here should apply this to their situation. It is 100% okay for you to make really whatever decision. Fill in the blank. In this case, it would be detachment. It would be, I'm going to do me, you do you. And that's 100% okay. The question is, how do you come to that conclusion? And are you sure you're comfortable with it? And you don't want to do it because someone else is telling you to do it. You don't want to do it because you think you should, because you'll never be able to do it, and it'll cause more harm than good. In this case, this is a very common response and situation that you're dealing with, and how you're proposing that you would want to handle it, that's pretty common kind of approach.
Okay.
People will do that quite a bit. If you look at the history of drug and alcohol treatment or professional drug and alcohol services, or anybody trying to help each other with substances, the family, for the most part, got their first significant help through Al-Anon, 12-step supported programs. That's just how it popped up. And there was this idea of detachment.
Yeah.
And detachment it's a bit misunderstood, but there's actually two parts of detachment. One is incredibly obvious. It's physical detachment. What does that mean?
You move.
Get out of the house. Get your own apartment, or kick the person out of the house, okay? The second, and really where a lot of the principles came from, was emotional detachment. And that's what we're here, we're doing our thing, but I'm not getting caught up in your drama, and I could care less whether you get caught up in my drama. And there are different skills with each one of those. There are things that you have to do to be able to physically detach. You didn't put anything in here, did you? Like,
A little marijuana.
if I started, you cannot put marijuana in coffee, Carol. You can tell, listen, hold up. You can tell Carol's a family coach. You know what I mean? Like she just said she put marijuana in my coffee. Whoa, that's some good shit, man. I'm a bit unorthodox in my approach if you're new here, so just so I think the question with that whole idea is, how do you do it? Not should you do it, or is it okay to do it? Absolutely, it's okay to do it. You guys get that?
Yeah.
There's a fundamental thing that you have to recognize about a family member dealing with this. You have a right to your life. Mm-hmm. You have a right to put yourself at the top of the list. And if it's I'm at a point where I just need to get my space, I don't think there's any question. Frank?
She described me up until that last point, and I just see it like, well, this is the way I was raised up, so now I'm just going back to that. I'm just gonna.
Well, we do resort to what we know, in general, not even related to drugs and alcohol. Things that we grew up with, ways we thought when we grew up, the behavior patterns, and the things we even say to each other, and the rituals and the way we approach life. A lot of it, you will resort to that automatically, and certainly if you grew up in a home where substances were present, you're gonna go back to that. But to kind of like clarify, you could be dealing with this no matter what, right? There are a lot of people out there that are dealing with very complicated relationship issues where alcohol is not maybe even the issue, right? What do I do with this relationship? And the most important thing is to evaluate it from a very, it sounds really hard to do, but like an objective point of view. What do I want in my life? How do I make these decisions? Who can I bounce them off of? And do not try to do your life on what you think you should do. That's where it gets really hard.
I was just talking about the ignoring part.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You resort to that, right?
Yeah.
So you resort to that whole ignore it, act like it's not there, because that worked for a while growing up.
Yeah.
Do you guys get that? Yes,
Yeah, I too. I'm in a very similar situation as you. A family full of alcoholics, having been raised that way all around it. Me being an alcoholic, me getting sober, 17 years. My husband got sober not long after me for about a year. Then he went back. But so for me, it was like in the beginning, I just had to work on myself. I couldn't work on anybody else. I had to work on myself. That's all there was. But I wanted him to be sober. Well, he didn't really want to be. That's okay. Now, I haven't wanted to leave him yet. But things are like, his alcoholism has done what it does for everyone, has progressed. Getting kind of to the point where I'm not liking it anymore, really, and it's becoming. But coming here has helped. Going to a therapist has helped. Another therapist who specializes in addiction, and so I see.
So let's talk about where the behavior of ignoring it even comes from, or whatever your behavior is that you feel like isn't doing you a lot of good right now. It absolutely is. It's a kind of ingrained in people as they grow up. It evolves over time. A lot of people say that as a child, your habits are easier to kind of like input. your brain is in this state called theta. You're growing up, you're receptive. It's just, that's why, have you ever heard it's easier to teach a child to speak a foreign language when he's young? So as you get young, this stuff is inputted into you, and it becomes who you are, and it becomes hardwired, and it's very hard to change. And when you talk about something like ignoring alcoholic behavior or out of control behavior of a family member, it's actually a survival mechanism. It's a defense mechanism in the classic sense. I do not emotionally want to get in touch. I cannot emotionally handle getting in touch with the reality of the situation of my father hitting me. Okay. So what I'm going to do is act like it doesn't happen, back off. That's beyond even addiction. That's all kinds of issues. And you can't judge yourself for holding on to that. That's how it is. But think of it this way. It's really hard to reverse even an innocent bad habit. Right? So how hard is it going to be to reverse a habit that has been there for maybe your whole entire life? And I think it's classic that you guys are sharing about the fact that you got into recovery and you woke up to it, right? I mean, that's just right out of the playbook. You're like, whoa, what is this? I've been living in the Matrix. I'm not down with this. And so, but how do I change? How do I change? Just stop doing it. Just detach. Well, it's not that easy. You're going to have to practice that. You're going to have to probably make mistakes, and you'll probably take one step forward yourself and 2 steps back. And you have to even figure out, how do you know whether you're doing okay with it? How do you know you're doing okay with detachment? This can also be parents to kids, because make no mistake, parents work on detachment as well. So how do you know whether you are successfully detaching? Anyone can answer this. Carolyn?
When they say something that 6 months ago you'd have went ballistic.
So you don't react.
That's how I knew
There's a behavioral change. You don't react as much. Absolutely.
I was just like, okay.
You go the whole entire day without worrying about them or thinking about them.
Oh, I'm not.
And then then you all right. In theory, you go the whole entire day without, and then you realize you didn't. Like, it's almost like, whoa, I didn't worry about this today. You find yourself sleeping a little bit better. You find yourself just a bit less stressed out and maybe a bit less preoccupied. It tends to happen over time. It's not Wednesday, you're all caught up in it. On Thursday, you're okay. You work on it over and over and over again, and eventually you start to establish different ways to respond. What other techniques could you guys recommend for somebody who's trying to detach? You guys get the idea of detachment, first of all. Let me make sure, when it comes to kind of handling these issues, a lot of people who've been dealing with it for a long time, it tends to happen if you've been dealing with it for a long time. It's not the kind of thing that's natural right up front. Up front, you tend to what? You want to try to fix the situation, you want to try to figure out what your options are, but eventually you can get to a point where you're like worn out and I detach. And then that means you step back from the circumstances and you don't allow what's going on with your loved one to influence you quite as much. It'd be disingenuous to say it doesn't influence you at all. But maybe when something bad happened in the past, you'd crank it up to a 10, you were totally strung out the whole day. Maybe now it's only going up to a 5.
For me, I found ways to really take care of myself.
Yes.
Super take care of myself, be it exercise, therapy, religious, or yoga, or just whatever is to be mindful about it, to really pay attention to it.
And when you get used to somebody laying on the floor, you eventually just step up.
Well, some people don't though.
Yeah.
Do you guys
But
get
if
that?
you've
Like,
done
so
it
that's
wrong,
sort of a very common metaphor that Frank just talked about. Like when you get used to people being, literally in that case, they were talking about being so drunk that they were laying on the floor. Eventually, you'll learn to step over them. But what's interesting is some people don't ever learn how to step over them. And the question becomes, what's the difference? And so ideas of taking care of yourself. You'll hear that phrase thrown around a lot. Self-care, take care of yourself, that kind of thing. First of all, do you guys get where we're coming from with detachment? And again, I want you to measure up where you're at in your particular situation and understand you don't even have to be ready for detachment. Some of you are sitting there saying, that I don't like that. That is ridiculous. That is not why I'm here. I do not want to take care of myself. I want to save my kid. And I want to validate you in that regard. I want you to understand that makes all the sense in the world. This tends to happen over time. You guys get that? It happens over time. You get to a point. We talked last week or the week before about just getting worn out. Over and over and over and over and over again. You just get worn out. You get to the point. Interestingly, I'm just going to give it to you straight. It tends to happen faster for spouses than it does parents. Spouses tend to get there a little quicker, you know. It's just a different type of deal, and that's okay. That's just the reality of the situation. So, parents tend to have a harder time for all the stuff you would think, right? It's my son, it's my daughter. I can't imagine just letting this happen. So we get that, but you can still get there too.
I would just say pat yourself on the back, because I've kind of the last couple of weeks done this whole thing about where we were at a year ago. And I was at such a different place. Because a year ago, I had only been coming here like a month and a half. And I used to just come in here and look like a deer in the headlights and think y'all were nuts. And now, I mean, I'm doing a lot of the right things.
And it's also really, really hard to measure family progress. It's not like when you're doing recovery. If you guys are in recovery, you can look at the calendar and say, here's how I'm doing. I haven't had a drink or whatever, right? It's pretty concrete. That's not how it works in family recovery. We have recovery coaches who are people in recovery, and they have to be in recovery for a year before they can get involved in coaching people. Then we have family recovery coaching, and I always joke because people be like, what's the requirement? And I'll be like, well, you've gone a year without any histrionics, or throwing a coffee cup at anybody, or putting a tracking device in anyone's car. You see how it's so different, and the idea of like measuring progress and saying I'm doing well, whenever it's not this thing where you're checking off days. You're gonna have to be mindful, pay attention to how you're feeling, pay attention to your reaction to things. You have to give yourself, there has to be milestones for any behavior change. Would you guys agree with that? Think about a diet, for example. What happens? My goal is this, and I'm gonna measure it, and I'm gonna track it and stuff. You gotta have the same type of thing with this. What other things, Carolyn mentioned you sort of talked about being just more at peace and feeling like you were handling yourself better in certain situations. What are other indications that you're doing better with this from a detachment point of view? Anybody have anything they would share about this? Yes?
I don't feel so guilty when I don't do what they wanted me to do.
Guilt goes down. Guilt goes down. You probably have your own red flag issue that was your thing. Guilt, anger, whatever it might be. You start to see a reduction in that process. You start to see that you aren't as obsessed about it. Do you guys know what I mean by that? Have you ever been obsessed about your loved one's situation? Yes?
You're not as easy to manipulate.
Wow. Yeah, I remember when that happened to me when they did that. Yeah, absolutely. You hold your ground a little better. You don't buy into the absolutely outrageous stories that kind of come. You're a little bit less easily manipulated. I like that.
Maybe you call a friend when you think you're being manipulated.
You have other actions involved. Let's go back to this obsession thing. Does anyone here know, or can they relate to the idea of being obsessed with the welfare of a loved one?
Yes.
Can you talk me through that a little bit, or I'll talk about it, and you can tell me if I'm on the right track. You think about it kind of all day. You play the scenarios out in your mind, and you have kind of like a decision tree. If this happens, here's what's going to happen, and this is what's happening. We could try this, I could try that, and it's kind of like it's an all-day, all-consuming event trying to figure out what's going on. One of the ways that you would know you were detaching is if there was less of that. You would catch yourself and redirect yourself. You would catch yourself and redirect yourself. You'd probably have to do it over and over again, and then you would just find that you start to do it naturally. What else would work in terms of knowing you're moving in the right direction here?
You're sleeping better.
Sleep, you get to sleep, you get the overall mood. Fatigue is often a symptom that you'll hear people talk about. That stuff starts to get better.
Less stress, like maybe no headaches or
Physical symptoms.
physical.
Absolutely, physical symptoms start to get better. You also will hear that your relationships with other people start to improve. What's going on there?
You have time for them.
You have time for them, and you can actually listen to them, and you've just spent the last 5 years obsessed with this person, so you weren't paying attention to this person. And that starts to move
And
in
you're
the right
not
direction.
uptight all the time.
And you're not uptight all the time, that kind of thing. Those are all ways it's going in the right direction. Now let's go back and make sure that we put a good bow on this thing. So that's detachment, right? So then you say, like, how do I do this, and what is this like? And there's two ways to think of this, guys, and you can fill out your own list, but there's two ways. There's immediate techniques to deal with the detachment issue, and then there are preventative techniques. Preventative techniques are things that you do on a routine basis that make it easier to deal with the bad stuff that comes down the road. This is yoga, prayer, morning meditation. This is going for walks. This is exercise. You're doing it no matter what. Do you get that part? And you have that list going for you. People usually call that self-care. Then immediate are the crap's hitting the fan, and what am I going to do right now? Or I find myself, for whatever reason, in the middle of this spin cycle. How do I get myself out of it? Do you guys see the difference? This you're doing every day no matter what. This is how to, what's the where's the ripcord? I got to get out of here. So we've talked about this one already. Let's talk about this one. What are your techniques when you're in the middle of the spin cycle?
Get out of there.
Well, get away from the situation.
Yes.
And you're specifically talking about your situation, right? So you can absolutely remove yourself from the source of the agitation. Let me talk about that for a minute, Mary Kay, before I go. Do you know, I used to do, anybody here at anger management?
Oh, yeah.
You know there is no such thing as anger management. It's kind of like a thing that they made up so people had to pay a fee and come to classes. It's really all about just like identifying thinking errors and things like that. But I used to do a lot of like research around anger because I did anger management courses for this psychiatric institute in Pittsburgh. And what's interesting is, hands down, the number one thing to deal with anger is to remove yourself either physically or mentally from the aggravating person, place, or thing. Do you get that?
Yes.
Now, that could be a person, your husband, okay? That could be a place. I don't know, name a place.
Your home.
Your home, work, that kind of thing. Or it could be a thing. It could be one of these freaking remote controls. Have you ever noticed how remote controls are no longer remote controls? There's like 73 buttons that do all these different things. So I'm pushing one, it's not working. I'm pushing one, I'm getting angry. And one of two things is going to happen here. This thing is going to get spiked off the wall, or what? I'm going to put it down and get away. And same thing with the person. There's no more effective technique than to getting yourself away from the situation. You can't always do that though, right? And sometimes even when you do that, you still come back and it's maybe even worse. So, but that is absolutely right. Get away. What else can you do in the moment?
Just stop and breathe.
So stop and breathe is it's stop and breathe for sure, but the key to this is stop, right? But what are you stopping?
The screaming and the hollering.
So there's an event going on. You're assuming there's an event going on. If there's an event going on, stop the train. If there's if you're in the middle of the storm, stop the train and kind of get out of the storm. Mary Kay, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, figure out what triggers you as a parent or a family member to making decisions that aren't the best for you. In other words, for me, it was recognizing that making a late night phone call to my son wasn't the best thing for me to do, because I wasn't going to get a good result. I had to stop myself from doing it. So
That's fantastic. Is that preventative or immediate?
both.
It's preventative, I would say.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is you're not like it. The immediate would be if you did make the call. Like what you're saying is, and everybody would have their own version of what Mary Kay just said. I'm just not going to go there again. It's like me when I'm trying not to drink. I'm not going back to the bar again.
Playing the tape.
Where I could go to the bar and still find a way to deal with it. It would be stressful. It would be harder. But the easier thing is to not go there. Does that make sense? You should absolutely if possible, avoid environmental triggers and situations and circumstances that are gonna push you over the edge. Why bother kind of stuff. Sometimes you can't help it though. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I found that, when my husband's had, of course, too much to drink, you know, there's no talking to an alcoholic.
Yeah, I wanna talk
So-
about that. Yep.
So I just, you know, I mean, I have said very nicely many times, and he knows now. I'll just say, Jerry, I really think we ought to talk about that tomorrow.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna give you some advice. Don't try to talk to somebody who's drunk. It's one of the worst experiences in I mean, there's nothing, one of the great ironies in my life is I no longer speak fluent drunk. I used to only speak fluent drunk, but like you will never get anywhere with that conversation. You wanna run for the hills and say, we'll talk about this tomorrow, because you guys know that circular kind of like, here's the thing, like, it's amazing that alcohol's legal and other drugs aren't, because if you think about that, that person who's saying all that stupid stuff actually thinks it makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did.
I mean, even though, like, you're like, do you understand? You just said a version of that 17 times in a row here, okay? So, you know, get away. Do not, that will make your head explode.
Yep.
What else in the immediate? So we agree, try to avoid, get away. We agree, stop, think, all those kind of things.
Let me ask, does that also apply to somebody under the influence of something else?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So what we have found is, I guess this is maybe not fair, but in my work with people, I've found other substances are easier to talk to people. You know, there are, like, let's take marijuana or pills that are downers. I can talk to those folks. They don't buy what I'm saying all the time, but it's not an impossible conversation. Central nervous system stimulants are very difficult. So what would that be? Cocaine or methamphetamine, because the person can't sit still and isn't going to focus. You may find that there are certain circumstances you can deal with. And you also may find that the level of the person's drinking you might be able to deal with. The point would be, if they're incoherent and they're not, you guys know when it's there, right? It's just sort of like this thing over and over and over and over. You don't want to bother with that. You're never going to win that conversation anyway, so get out of Dodge. So I think to get away from if it's happening in front of you, right? But then there's another way that people get spun up, and it's when the person's not even there, and you may not even be at home, and it's more on the worry end. And it's more on the obsession end. You guys get that one, which is less about how do I stop it and get away from it. This is more about, this thing is eating my lunch. I can't quit thinking about it. I'm obsessed with this. I'm worried about it. What are your techniques to deal with that end of the spectrum? Do you get the difference between the two? You can absolutely run for the hills around the person who's bothering you. This situation, so stopping and thinking and breathing is the best thing you can do in this situation. The problem is you have to recognize that you need to stop and think and breathe. And there has to be, and some of the preventative stuff you do will help you do that. So some of the preventative stuff you do, whether it's meditation or prayer or daily exercise to reduce stress, will make it easier for you to recognize, here I go. But you have to pay attention to yourself to even begin to do that.
I have a question.
Yes.
My daughter is like addicted to Adderall, and she's either up or she's down. But when you said like obsessed with it, it just made me think of something right now, is that I would Google everything I could about it to try and learn. But then I find, I just spent like 2 hours doing this, and okay, I have all this knowledge, but she's still, you know.
So I'm going to get off. I'm going to get off in the weeds a little bit here, but it's very important for what you're dealing with. First of all, understand that is not abnormal. Do you guys get that? That is 100% a healthy response to this situation. It would be very unusual if you didn't do that. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is maybe understanding why you're doing that. All right. So if you think about how the human brain works, and you think about human beings in general, understand that it's only been maybe within the last 100 years, 150 years where we've been relatively safe. Every single one of us is wired to notice danger because it keeps you alive. People who were chilled out back in the day got stomped by a woolly mammoth or eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, right? Like, or destroyed in a war. Seriously, it was a dangerous world. It's been, and from a human evolutionary standpoint, our brain is not ready for physical safety. So what it does is it transfers that hypervigilance to psychological safety. And so for us that are parents, it'll be our kids. So what you're doing is you are literally surveying the landscape. Back in the day, somebody had to be on watch and make sure everyone was safe, right? That's you doing that for your kids. And the problem is, well, the internet makes that all too convenient, and be careful where you get information, and you can go down a rabbit hole and wind up being there for 3 hours. But what you're doing there is 100% sensible and on point. But can I talk about this for a minute? Can I camp out here, guys, and just sort of go down there? One of the ways to try to deal with that, seeking information, solving the problem, trying to save your kid, trying to find out all you can, is at some point in time you say, I've kind of like done enough Googling, all right? I'm starting to come to this group, I'm starting to learn more about it. You start to, maybe you read some other stuff, but you start to get to the point where you feel comfortable that you know enough, and you literally say, here's my plan for the time being. And that depends on your individual situations. It might be, I'm gonna try to get an intervention team together. It might be, I'm in the monitoring phase. It might be, I'm gonna learn more. You go to this point where you move from just information gathering to action, and the idea would be that moves you off that Google addiction, right? And you got to be super careful when you're Googling things about addiction and mental health, because who knows what you're gonna find. You can really get into some interesting areas. So developing that plan, even if it's just mentally, of here's where we're at with it, this is what I know, this is what we're gonna do. And try to go back to that over and over and over again. You can talk through that and kind of be honest with yourself on where you think you are in the process. And what do I mean by that? Some of you are here and what you absolutely want is to try to see, how do I fix my kid? How do I save my kid from this situation? How do I save my husband? How do I save my wife? What would be the factors that would make you say that? Maybe you have some control over the situation. You think you can still get in there and do something. Maybe the person's younger. Maybe they're not really being abusive or in any kind of way, or stealing your property and are still at their house. You have some kind of connection where you feel like we can do something. And you can start thinking about an intervention team, or you can start thinking about getting a family meeting together, which is a different conversation, but that is an option. Let's stop there. Hey Aaron, how are you? Good to see you, man. I'm so glad you're here. So what about that point? Let's talk about that point for a minute. What are your questions regarding that? You guys get that option? You can start as a mom or dad or husband or wife to say, I am going to plan an intervention. Maybe intervention is the wrong term. I'm going to plan a family meeting where we're going to sit down and blow this thing up. And we're going to, for lack of a better term, confront this situation. What do I need to tell you about that in order to make you feel like you could do that? What do you need to know about that?
Everything.
Everything?
Yeah.
All right.
Don't forget your sign-in sheet.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Everything about this. All right, let's figure this out. So the first thing is, what are you dealing with? So this is literally part of the everything. Whoever is going to be involved in this person's life, whoever needs to be in the conversation about what they should do, whether you call it an intervention or a family meeting or whatever, needs to know what they're dealing with. And this is addiction, okay? And I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to go through this real quick.
Team.
The team. You guys get that part? You want to get a couple people involved in this conversation. It's very hard to do it one-on-one. If I'm worried about Dory and I approach Dory just me, she can tell me how crazy I am and how I didn't see what I thought I saw. She can explain how her shirt's actually red, and I'll be like, Dory, that's a blue shirt. Nah, no, it's not. And she'll talk to me long enough, and I'll be like, wow, I don't even know what color things are anymore. Have you guys ever had that experience?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, you leave totally thinking that you're the one who is insane, right? You're the one who has this problem. So let's go through and understand what you're dealing with. This is a brain issue, and it has to do with the release of dopamine, guys, and it's very, very simple. Take that back. It's a complex issue that at the end of the day plays itself out in a simple way. What are the reasons why it happens? What are the dangers? It tends to happen a little bit more where there's co-occurring issues, where there's trauma. Also this thing, this idea of lower dopamine. Some people are born with lower dopamine. People think that has something to do with ADHD. It's the kid who can't sit still. It's the person who's always like, what's next, what's next? So there's vulnerabilities around who becomes addicted. But for the record, anybody can become addicted to anything if you do it long enough, okay? But this tends to be depression, anxiety, trauma, lower dopamine. Some of us walk into the circumstances more vulnerable than others. Genetic factors too. Dopamine is released when we do anything pleasurable, not pleasurable in a euphoric sense, but pleasurable in a, that was good, that's gonna help keep me alive, do it again. So when you eat food, about 50% more dopamine is released in your brain, and your brain says, let's do that again. The problem is when you do methamphetamine, 1,200% more dopamine is released in your brain. You flood your brain. And you can't do that over and over and over and over again. For some of us, what happens is the brain shuts off the production of dopamine. That's what addiction is, okay? And if you're dealing with that phenomenon, you're not dealing with a rational, reasonable person. They will never wake up one day, why am I walking around today? I literally believe I was born with less dopamine. I also grew up in a house full of stress and trauma. That reduces dopamine. So around the age of 14 or 15, I pick up my first drink, and boom, it shoots me way up. You guys see this? And game on, color TV. I thought, oh, this is, we can do this again, and again, and again, and again. And this doesn't happen the first time you do it, but then what happens is your brain backs off the production and cuts you back to a 6. But you're still like, oh, but I know that good stuff. And you're also hanging out with some people who have some other good stuff. You're like, let me try that, and I can still get where I want to go. I can still get where I want to go, but the brain, that's still too much, so it backs me off again, so on and so forth. And this is what's been come to know, and it's actually called substance use disorder severe. This is called addiction. Over here, it might be a party. Okay? This is unreasonable, out of control, compulsive behavior. This is the head scratching stuff. This is why would they do that again? I cannot believe it. He knew he was going to get fired. She knew she was going to leave the kids or lose the kids. He knew that there could be fentanyl in that. This is because this is the process. And this is what it looks like. This is what it should look like. This is normal firing of the neurotransmitter dopamine. This is depletion. And so if you're walking around like this, you're compulsively seeking the substance. It has nothing to do with reasonable decision making. Do you guys get that? It is not, nobody in active addiction wakes up in the morning and it's like a pro and con kind of decision making thing. It's 100% instinctual when activated. It's 100% driven on the same kind of mechanism if you were starving and you wanted to get food. Now, we got ourselves there, we did what we did. This isn't to make an excuse for anyone's behavior. I've said that a million times. I'm not saying it makes it okay for anyone to steal anyone's car or treat anyone like crap. But this is for families to know you're just not going to talk anybody out of it. Because you're literally not dealing with a person who can be talked into or out of anything. Yes, sir.
After you've gotten your fix of dopamine and your brain readjusts, do you have a moment or a phase of clarity where it's like, geez, I screwed up, I shouldn't have done it, I did it again?
Very good question. So it tends to take a little bit of time away from it, believe it or not, to get there. Once you've gotten here, you actually have to, you cannot really get there to reasonableness by continuing to use. Because even when you get a hold of the substance, it doesn't actually work anymore. You will hear people say over and over again in recovery, I was using to try to feel normal. I was using to just try to get by. And if you look at this slide, you can't even get there. And that, guys, is truly the difference between somebody who became addicted and somebody who partied hard, right? You can party hard and go at it, and you can, that's not good either. But this is really the stuff that makes families just look at you like, what are you thinking? That's where you do all the things. And the reason is you're not thinking because you're here. Once you stop, it does start to come back. You can see this is 10 days without, This is 100 days without, so you do start to come back online.
So it's not the 2 or 5 days in between
It's,
to ever achieve that?
yes, you got it like, so this is 10 days, you can see, and this is 100 days. Now this was with deep end kind of cocaine. Stimulants tend to be, well, not all stimulants, but like cocaine and methamphetamine and stuff like that tend to be tougher, a little bit longer.
But in like 45 days, I felt like we carried on a real conversation.
Yeah, you clear up relatively quickly, to be honest. You come back around. It is not a permanent condition by any means. That's good news. It's not like a traumatic brain injury or anything. You still, though, you do not go back above the line. You return to like your original vulnerability. You see what I'm saying? So it's not like all of a sudden I'm fixed. I still have to deal with this, but I get back to where I was and who I was and what I was. You know, I can think the same way. I can finally, then you can talk me into stuff. You can probably you're talking me into stuff like right here. You know? Then you're, hey, let's talk about this. Are you sure you want to do that? But before that, you're dealing with somebody who you're going to have to put parameters around. So the first thing in terms of like, when somebody says, tell me everything I need to know about an intervention or a family meeting or doing something, the first thing is be really, really realistic about what you're dealing with. Understand that it's not as simple as pointing out the consequences that the person is going through and having them have this epiphany and say yes. I mean, I ran rehabs for a lot of years, guys, and I've had a lot of people come in, and I've never really met anybody who was there because they wanted to be there and they realized they needed to be there. It was always because there was external pressure, and basically I had no choice but to go. Sometimes it was wife, mom, sometimes it was the job, sometimes it was because they felt like they were going to get fired. But believe me, it wasn't like, oh, today's Wednesday, it's a good day for rehab. That never existed. So you put them, what questions do you have about that? Because that's yes, Carol.
I'm a little confused about, I thought you could have permanent damage from some of the drugs and from alcohol. No?
No, you can have permanent damage from stuff.
Like if you were really, really bad for a really, really long time.
You can have permanent damage for stuff that can happen while you were on drugs or alcohol.
But it doesn't.
It's not, you're not going to, like, if you overdose and oxygen is cut off to your brain, you're going to have permanent damage. But it's not because there's no such thing as destruction of brain cells or anything.
Yeah, but you're not gonna have information for those 30 years you stay drunk. It's like you're not gonna retain much, so you're gonna.
Well, it would be like anything else. It would be like you're behind the 8 ball.
Yeah.
Just like if I decided, if I led a certain life and I was sedentary and I was eating the wrong things and all of a sudden I wanted to run a marathon, that's not going to be the easiest thing if I changed. But it's not because you've permanently damaged your brain.
Okay, but what about that whole age of first use and their mental maturity?
Yeah, there's no truth to the idea that we stopped growing at the age we started using.
Wow.
There is truth to this thing called state-dependent learning, which all of you go through. State-dependent learning means if I learn to do something in a certain emotional state or a certain mental state, I will do that better if I'm in that state. It'll be what I'm used to. So if I'm used to going to work high and dealing with Frank and dealing with Dory high, and all of a sudden I'm not high, I'm not going to be very good at that. I might look like a 12-year-old. You follow me?
Oh.
But it's not because I actually stopped growing there. Understand? Because there's also a lot of things that I still was good at. And you talked, like there are people who still went to work. Like remember, there's different levels. There are functioning people. And that wasn't like every single thing stopped. Certain things stopped. You get that? Yes, ma'am.
What about either laced marijuana or synthetic marijuana in a young kid?
Yeah, I think you can get a hold of, now I wouldn't even call that like drugs of abuse or anything, I would call that like poisoning.
Yeah.
You can get poisoned and something can happen and you won't come back. You know, that's absolutely,
Sort of what,
that's absolutely true.
That's sort of what we think we're dealing with, we don't know.
Yeah, it can, did you guys hear the question? So if you use something that has something in it, you can get poisoned or you can get permanently damaged, but that's on a different mechanism than dopamine going away.
And how can you tell, this is the problem, nobody seems to know what to do.
So the question was, how can you tell? How do you know what's going down?
I mean, like, how do you know what they're on?
How do you know whether it's permanent damage or not in that case?
Right.
Is that what you mean, right?
Yeah, like street marijuana that could have been laced when the kid was normal, and then all of a sudden, even after being off marijuana, it still is now talking right.
Yeah, so there's all kinds. The problem with this situation, remember last week when we talked about intuitive versus precision medicine? Precision medicine is, I can tell you exactly what's wrong with you. You need your appendix out, here's what we need to do. Mental health and drug addiction is not precision medicine. It's on the opposite end of the spectrum. It's intuitive.
Right.
That's why no one's telling you what's up.
Right.
And so you get to the best guesses. You get to the best, and typically what people do is they'll prescribe certain types of medication and see if they respond. And if they respond to certain things, and they say, well, we think it's this. Do you guys get that part? And so the deal would be, how do you help somebody in that situation? You have to engage them in a process where they're around people, therapists, psychiatrists, people who could evaluate the situation and help them through it. There is no definitive answer to that. Now, obviously, you can get much better answer than I can give you if you sit down with the person.
Right, but the thing is that the child is now 18, and now no one will tell the parents anything.
Yeah, just so y'all know that they shouldn't be telling you anything even when they're under 18.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. So the parents don't know what's going on. I'm going to talk through this in a minute. It's kind of related to the team, okay? Kind of related to what do you do. Do you guys get this part though? You be real honest about this situation. Here's what we're dealing with. And you figure out who else can be there. People say, how many people should be on a team? You know, at least 2. Ideally 4, if you want a number. But take 2, mom and dad. You talk beforehand. You figure out what it is that you want the person to do. This is extremely important because many times people will go into a situation and they'll say things like, I just want you to get better, or you got to do recovery, or this, you need help. You need help. And the thing is none of that is actually concrete in any kind of way. Yes?
So what if you've been on the team for 10 years with your situation, and the people that were on the team with you have just tuned out, and you're the only team member? So then what?
So you get to a situation where you start to say, what can I do? What can I personally do about this? And maybe related to some of the stuff earlier, do I need to start focusing more on myself because the team has disintegrated? The details of all this stuff are very, very important, guys. I don't want to give anybody direct advice without knowing exactly what's going on. I will tell you, in general, you can get to a point where you say, this is just out of my hands, I'm going to have to step away from it. You guys get that? It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. If you don't have anyone else who can help you, and you feel like you've been doing this for 10 years, I mean, if you just wanted straight recommendations, would be start looking at whether or not you can continue to do this, and maybe how do you take care of yourself and get your own type of self-care or counseling or whatever it might be, stress management, because it's very, very hard to influence a person one-on-one if they're in the middle of that. It's very, very hard. Therapists can do it, counselors can do it, because they're kind of stepped away from the situation. So I could talk to Dory, probably better than Dory's mom could talk to her, just because I'm not emotionally involved. Yes?
How do you figure out what the person is on? Like, for example, our son, we know he's smoking marijuana.
Yeah.
We know that. But he's acting very, very strange, and he just kind of blocks us out. He's not the same kid.
Yeah.
I don't know what he's doing, but he denies that almost denies that he does marijuana. And it's like, I spoke to him yesterday, it's like, I know.
Yeah.
Like, you can't deny that. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, I do that, but I don't do anything else.
So first of all, you're on the right track because you're saying it to him. You say, I know something's up. You say something. That's the first thing. The second thing is, let's go back to this idea of what do we want to see happen. And what if I told you what they're on is not that important? And how much they're doing is not that important? And even what is going on is not that important at first. What is important is, what do we want the person to do? What do we want to see be different in terms of this person's life and situation? And you're not allowed to say, we want them not using drugs, we want everything like it was before. If you sit down and you do that, it's typically an answer like this. Well, we would love to see him maybe go to rehab, or at least go see a therapist, or at least start a recovery program. So, but what will happen is, as a family member, we will get completely preoccupied with the details of what's going on. Because what we're looking for is Here's what Frank's got. It's called post-traumatic stress disorder and alcohol use disorder severe. It probably started when he was in his mid-20s. Looks like it's been going on this long. Here's exactly what I'm gonna do with Frank. I'm gonna give him, this shot. I'm gonna slap him around a little bit, and he's gonna be good. And that's what we want. I mean, you could say you don't want that, but that's what you want. And that's what I wanted when I thought my son was dying of respiratory failure. I didn't want the doctors to tell me, we think it's this. We think it could go here. Do you follow me? I didn't want that at all. I was like, if one more person says that, I'm gonna choke somebody out. Like, what is it? What's it called? How do you fix it? So I 100% understand, guys. But understand that doesn't exist. And you've been told it does. You have been told it does by the general public. That's the rehab industry. That that works for them. That you can get him on a plane and send him to me now, and I'll dip him in the waters of recovery and he'll be good. Understand how much BS is in there, guys. The deal is, how severe do you think it is? And what do you think kind of can get this ball rolling? What are the factors that are going to come into that? If you've gone through this before, you're going to come into it with a certain amount of knowledge, and you're going to be able to say to yourself things like, is this as bad as it was? You get where I'm coming from?
Mm-hmm.
What's up? No, go ahead and say it, dude. It's all right.
Not you. We're just talking about something really stupid.
No, we
my
say,
son
how
did.
severe is this? And then we just thought about something.
Something that he did
recently,
was-
It's like, oh my.
Hey, and the other thing is it also may not be as severe as you think it is.
Oh, it was.
Well, so.
Oh, yeah. I'm not even going to go into it.
It's looked pretty rough sometimes.
It is.
That's awesome.
No,
So,
I'm not even here.
well, so,
Yeah. I mean,
So
we
here's-
got a kid who just doesn't care about
Yeah.
anything. He was supposed to come tonight. He
Yeah.
promised us he would. So you talk about a team and pulling together a team, and then the team's all sitting around going, okay, where's the main attraction? How do you get that guy to the table to even listen? Because we talk to him, and he will get so irritated. Like yesterday, I said, okay, buddy, come on, let's just go talk real quick in my room. And nothing, just don't want to talk to you about what we want to do tomorrow. He got so irritated that he damn near started crying. And
he got so upset.
he
Yeah.
just gets so annoyed, and I'm annoying, and shut up, and he's,
Yeah. So let's explain. So this is my son.
that's.
And so I always put this up because it's impossible to set boundaries and start talking about change without the person getting mad. Can we all agree? There's no such thing as somebody who's happy about boundaries. So we have to understand that they're going to get angry. This is over an iPad. All right? This is what happens when Aiden literally thinks he can beat me up. Look at him. I mean, he's seriously challenging me. So you're mine, dude. And so.
I understand he has older kids.
Yeah. And so you have to again, we acknowledge that, and we understand what's going down, and we start to think, if he's not going to play ball, if you've tried to talk to the person, if you tried to have him come in your room, I mean, you guys are doing a lot of the stuff that makes a lot of sense, but at a certain point in time, you say, he's just not going to play ball. So you go, what do we have control of where we can have some influence? What can we bring to the table that might get his attention? All right, and I think I have some slides in here that'll talk about that. Let me see here.
He just turned 18, so now I'm getting the I'm 18 routine.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a big giant black hole that I don't see, and I hear everybody's stories, it all just sounds like a complete and utter useless thing. But how can you tell your child, I put my hands up, there's no helping you, how do you do that? You can't, you don't. So
No, you don't. You absolutely, you typically, I mean, some people will try, but it's very, very hard. Maybe when he's 28, but when he's 18, it's going to be exceedingly difficult. So you have to also be honest with yourself in that situation.
Am I going to take his car? Am I going to take his phone? Am I going to kick him out of the house?
You might.
No,
you might. I didn't say, so.
It's a black hole.
Okay, this is very important, guys, and this is awesome. Like, this is right what you want to start thinking about. If you can I just talk about what just happened in your mind?
Yeah.
And so, literally, the conversation went from I can take his phone to his car to kick him out. It's a black hole. That, you have to fight that. You have to fight that thinking, and you have to say, what can I do right now, and what's the next step? It may be kicking him out, but right now, it also may be taking the phone, it may be taking the car, it may be doing nothing. But be careful of trying to project on what's going to happen, even if it's happened 7 times before. Because what's going to happen, you're going to get caught up in a situation where you can't act on it. Because you're telling yourself, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you might be completely right. You may be completely right. It may wind up there, but the deal is, if you want to set yourself up for the most likelihood of success, you got to talk yourself out of that type of thinking. You have to make yourself not go there, because you're not going to have a chance otherwise. And you're allowed to think that I'm full of crap right now, but when you go to your kid, you're going to have to approach it a little bit different. And it's all the stuff you talked about. There are 2 different types of influence or boundaries that people talk about. A lot of times we think of this: financial, tangible things. You can no longer live at the house. I'm going to take the car. I can, I'm not going to pay for college. I'm not going to keep paying the rent. This is real tangible boundaries. Emotional boundaries are just as impactful. They're things like, I can't talk to you on the phone anymore, like if the person's not living at home, because when I do, I cry for a week. Because I can't be part of this and watch you self-destruct. Or, you want an ongoing relationship, but you're high every time I talk to you. I'm not going to be part of that. These are boundaries too. It's not always about this. And statistically, they are equally effective. You guys get that? We like to focus on this, because why do we like this? Real tangible. You can leave here with, I'm no longer paying for the phone. But what I'm telling you is, you're allowed to bring all of these conversations to the table and start to work through them. Start to work through them and start to think about where would there be any type of influence. And then not only where would there be any type of influence, what do you want to have happen out of the influence? Now let's stop and let's talk about this influence, part. What questions do you have about, this list is not exhaustive either. You can add, you might know more. What other thoughts or questions will we have about influence and boundaries? Yes, ma'am.
My big concern is, sometimes I think about, I want my son to kind of be on his own so he can see how tough it is, but I feel like if I do that, he's going to fall so, who knows where he'll end up going or what he'll do, and I'll never get him back after that. That's my biggest fear.
Yes, and that's a legit thing. So if you see what's going on there, so let's just pretend it was us just talking, and I just said, well, just tell him to go out and figure it out. Here's why I can't do that, because I go here with this, and right now I don't think I can do that. That's a legit thing to say. So then you go, well, what would it be like taking the phone? If I took his phone, it'd be hell to pay. I'm not ready to do that. And you have to start asking, what is there not? What is there, and you might come to a point where the only thing you can do is small emotional changes. Or you might talk and say, that's it, we're done. I'm calling Favor right now. I'm getting an interventionist in here. By the way, let's talk about interventions in Favor. Favor Greenville, we do not have the manpower to do traditional interventions, guys. Traditional interventions are very, very staff intensive. You get the guy in a car, you get him to the airport, I did 200 interventions. It's not easy. We do family meetings though. We do have a coach that's willing to sit down with people and facilitate a family meeting, but it won't be like the kind of thing you see on TV. You know what I'm talking about, where you read the letters. You suck and here's why. And that's why I want you to go to rehab. We don't do that, but we do sit down and help you talk through it, okay? But we also can refer you to an interventionist. So you may go home tonight and be like, let's do the whole thing, man. A lot of people say interventions are kind of like swinging for the fences. What I've noticed with people who've done interventions, it's a tough decision. It's a very tough decision, because they know they're going to get Frank in the room, and it's going to be, you either do this or that, or here's the ultimatum. So do you guys understand? Like, that's why we don't tell you have to do that. You have to really, really think it through, though, because if you go there, guys, you got to be prepared to go there. You can't tell the person, you can no longer live in my house unless you go to rehab, unless you're ready to say that. Many times, especially early on, people are not ready to say that. So you start to say, what can we do? Well, I'm not ready. I'm going to give you an example. I talked about this, I think, last week, if I was here last week or the week before. My daughter went through some stuff, and did I tell you, like, when I went to, she was getting ready to come home, and when I went to the facility, and she's doing fine now, it's a long story there. Well, the truth is, my daughter didn't have a mental health problem or an addiction problem. It was a thing called PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. And it caused a major flux in progesterone and thyroid issues, and it looked like bipolar disorder. She's not been on any kind of psychiatric meds. She's not been on anything other than progesterone 7 days a month, and she's been symptom-free for almost 2 years, for about 18 months. Now, we had the wherewithal and the money and the time to put her through that. I tell you what, because and we had, how do I want to say this? I'm a relatively knowledgeable person in this area, and I'm very comfortable with expressing myself. And so, but when we went to people, they said, that's not what it is, we're not going to get that tested. When we went to St. Francis where they tested, they were like, oh yeah, that's absolutely what it is, happens all the time. So it makes me, I don't want to get off in the woods, but it makes me wonder what's going on with people.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It really does.
Yep.
So at any rate, but what I did know when I went that day for her to leave that facility was there was no situation in the world that I was going to kick her out of the house because they want to do a contract. Has anybody ever been in a situation where somebody wanted to do a contract? That's about the biggest freaking falsitude that there ever was. A contract, writing things down on a piece of paper and getting two people to sign them, moms and dads, and it's like, what are we entering into? Like a hostile takeover, mergers and acquisitions, sign here? No, you just set yourself up for all kinds of headbutting. But they were doing it, and I didn't want to be Mr. Recovery Guy. I wanted to be just a dad, and so I went in. But when I walked in, I said, there are no conditions, I can think of no conditions that I would ever kick my daughter out no matter what. And that was me being honest with myself. And I said it right in front of her, and basically, the people were like, oh, don't do that, don't say that. She'll take advantage of it. Well, I don't know what to tell you, I'm not going to do it. So it'd be better for us to get that out on the table so that we know exactly what you're doing with. So maybe that's where, what do we know needs to get taken off this list? And what are we left with? You guys get that? And you come to something, and then that's the boundary, that's the thing that you're willing to talk about using as influence. And the second part is, what do you want to have come out of it? Now when I say, why are you guys leaving? This hurts, man.
Our son's done with ADSAP.
Oh, I see how it is. Their son's doing great, so they don't need me anymore. I'll miss you. So, do you follow where I'm going with this? It's like, first of all, what do I know I can't do? What am I left with? And then the second part is, what am I going to ask? What is my ask from my loved one? Now, what do I mean by that, guys? What are your options in the fill in the blank part of that equation? You guys know this. You can ask them, like, you think you're going to rehab or you're out. You're starting to see that therapist you used to see, or you're out. The out part is really, or you get where I'm coming from, is what is the ask has to be specific. You can't just say.
You don't have an ask, though. If they're not living with you anymore, you're not financially.
Well, then that's not where you're at, Carolyn. So you're not in this. You've already gone through this. Carolyn has already gone. See, you have to be careful in your situation that you don't rewind the clock back to answers that you needed 18 months ago. You aren't in this situation where she's at your house. You've gone through some stuff to get here. Your thing will be, a completely different dynamic.
Do you just assume that the emotional is working?
Yeah, it's a great question. You don't. It's hard to tell when they're not in front of you. Do you guys get, like, if you're living with, if you're dealing with somebody who's not living with you, it's really, really hard to tell whether it's having any impact. You know if it's having impact if they're in your house, right? But if you haven't talked to them or they're not there, yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry to admit this, but I'm not sure I even understand this whole thing up there, this influence versus boundaries. For example, financial, you know, you can live at our house if, I'm not sure I understand what those categories are.
So, if we can all agree we have an unreasonable person, can we all agree that?
Yeah.
And one of the ways you have to deal with an unreasonable person, whether it's a person who's addicted, or just a bully, or just somebody who's, you know, just not there, is setting boundaries rather than reason.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is this is a list of different things that fall into the boundary category.
Okay.
And they can also influence the person's behavior. Boundaries are meant for you to say, here's the deal, I'm not down with this, but the bonus is it typically influences the person's behavior. People do not do things. I just read this last night. I'm reading a book called Nudge. It has nothing to do with like addiction or anything. It has to do with behaviors. And everything that you guys have been told about addiction, recovery, or even doing life is based on this premise that if people know the right thing to do, they'll do it. And it's probably one of the stupidest things ever. You guys in here all know the right thing to do, and you've done the wrong thing. Don't make eye contact with me or anything. I won't judge you. See, and we've kind of like, it's like as if that if your son or your daughter or your loved one just realizes how bad this is, they're going to do the right thing. That will never happen. So what you do is you have to put fences around them so that they bump into these fences and their behaviors are almost forced to change. Then they get that moment where I showed the brain how it clears up, and then maybe you can start to see some change where you have a conversation. Think about dealing with a 4-year-old. Do you really reason with a 4-year-old? I mean, we might in this world, like we live in a world where we've been told all kinds of weird stuff, right? Hey, so I'm going to go off in the weeds here for a minute. So I'm coaching AYSO soccer for my kids. I haven't coached for a long time because my older kids are going, what in the world? I feel like the world is going to end. They literally had a training on teaching parents how to cheer. I was sitting in this with my wife and I was texting her. I was like, this is a sign of the end of the world. And it was like, you have to cheer in future tense, not present or past tense. And I literally was like, I mean, that has nothing to do with anything other than like, how did I even get there, guys? Oh, I was talking about in this world, maybe we will soft pedal it, right? But with a 4-year-old, you have to just say yes or no, and if you don't, here's what happens. To a certain extent, you're dealing with the same type of boundary setting with a person who has this issue. If you've tried other things, if you've talked to them in your kitchen and they've said, screw you, I'm not, like you said, you tried to talk to them. I'm not saying you don't try that stuff. But at a certain point in time, you say to yourself, I've been banging my head against the wall, and this is starting to hurt. And I don't think they're moving. You guys understand? It doesn't seem to be doing anything. Then you start to say, where do I have some control and some influence over this? And if I stop, I'm making up a scenario, but so let's pretend that the person, you're paying the rent so that they can go to college somewhere, okay? But they're using cocaine and drinking all the time, and they're just out of control, and you've tried to talk to them 5 times, and and you stop paying the rent. That will influence their behavior. Because what will happen, guys, they will have to get out of their routine, right? Something's going to have to happen. They're either going to be homeless, or they're going to start talking about how do I get help. Is that still not clicking?
Well, I'm so new to this that I don't know where I'm at. So
Yeah.
It's a young, so the person's living at home, they say, you have to stop your behavior, or you can't live at the house, or you can't have the car, you can't have a phone. It doesn't do any good. It's like
no, and that's why you don't even say it unless you're sure you're going to follow through on the.
Well, they did follow through, but nothing changed. So I'm trying to see how.
Is he back at home then?
Well, sort of.
So the thing is that like, well, that's where it goes, guys. It's like, and this is why we don't necessarily say like you tell them to leave.
Right, because you don't want to put an 18-year-old out on the street.
Well, it's also about like most parents can't do that.
Right.
I mean, what we do is it goes back to what I just said is like we live in this world where people think it's just like, say, knock it off. And you'll hear people talking about drug and alcohol issues with their kids, and the other parent will say, well, if that was my son, I would do. No, you wouldn't. I know you wouldn't. I'm a therapist. I've talked to people like you 100 times. If it was your son, there would be a reason not to do it. Because he's left-handed, and we know left-handed people statistically in Greenville County have less of a chance. Yes?
I understand the financial side of that. Could you, first of all, can the emotional side, those boundaries,
yeah, there's two
be
things.
as effective? And
yes.
Can you, I don't understand, can you give me an example of one or two of them?
I will. So we have to agree that the specifics of this are very individualized. And no means should you go home here tonight and say, like, this means somebody should have to leave your house. And the most important thing is to make sure whatever the boundary change you say is that it's a reasonable one that you can live with and you can deal with, okay? So the second thing is around emotional. Emotional is just as powerful because there's two different things going on when a person's using. One is, how do I maintain my lifestyle? How do I maintain whatever it is I'm into, depending on the age? That's one thing. And the second thing is, for most people, there's a very small percentage of people who are narcissistic and actually sociopathic. We're told, you guys are told that we're all like that. But most of us aren't. Most of us are just people who've gotten ourselves caught up. They will rely on interaction with their family for soothing and validation. So an example would be a 25-year-old kid I was working with for years, man, and just sort of like doing his thing but always maintain contact with his mom and dad, right? Until he was even living at home, he was doing his thing, it was all, you know what I mean? There was no financial control, and they said, we can't take these calls anymore, it's breaking our heart. And that hit him. What do I need to do? I can't live with that, okay? Did you get that? Is that cleared up a little bit?
I got that one.
And people usually start here. This is usually like stuff that's just painfully obvious. And this is also the stuff where you guys get told you're enablers and you're codependent, like, what are you paying for the house for? That kind of thing. That's why people start there and they don't really talk about this. But just as often, the person's living on their own or maybe has no contact with mom and dad and you have to go, this is just as hard as this, though. Go ahead and tell mom to not take a phone call. Just stand back when you do it so she can't punch you in the face. Because, it's like, let's get real, 83% of heroin addicts in New York City have weekly contact with their mothers. And it's not for money. It has nothing to do with money. When a kid is sick, they want to talk to their mom. Okay? Now, I hesitate to say that because what happens is, there's a lot of moms in here that are like, we're going to pick him up right now. I've just caused some major problems, I get it. But what I want to tell you is that the way to approach that as a mom is also to say, like, you've probably in the past given your kids medicine that they didn't necessarily want, right? You probably have made them do things that was good for them that they didn't want to do. You get where I'm coming from? And so this is the same principle. The same exact principle is at play here. It's not about, and this is so much easier said than done, it's not about the feelings, it's about stepping back and saying, where do I need to go, what do I need to do with this next? Carol?
I think this is a good time to mention that a coach can really help you with this, to drill down, to figure out where you
So
belong.
we have a couple different ways to get additional detailed conversation around what you might need to do. One is, we do have a 24-hour support line, and the card is up here, and you will get a coach, and they will walk you through it. You can also get your own individual family coach. So we have probably 7, 8 family coaches who aren't people in recovery, they're family members who've gone through this, who can help talk you through details, questions, what were you thinking, what do you think you could do, what do you think you couldn't do, that kind of stuff. So that's also an option. You could sometimes people have a therapist that they're already talking to. That's a person you could talk to with this. Be careful where you try to get your advice. If you're asking a family member or a friend, that's cool too, but they got to be supportive and they got to be non-judgmental. You cannot leave a conversation about this feeling worse about yourself. This has got to be a person who has a little bit of expertise, but also has, the judgment to not just tell you, we should have done this or you should do that, that kind of thing. But you're gonna, this, what you said, man, this is so important. You don't go to the worst thing on this, like you can't live at the house unless you are sure you can do that. And do not judge yourself if you can't do that. Because if I kick Carol out and I'm doing it because I think I should, what's gonna happen? She's gonna come back the next day and I'm gonna be right in the same situation. People, I'll be honest with you, people typically don't say get out of the house until it's way down the road. You guys know that? Okay, it typically doesn't happen right away. It's just the way it is for all kinds of obvious reasons, right? It's early, we don't know what's going on. The bridges haven't quite been burned. But go ahead, here, we'll talk about you. Go ahead and deal with it for the next 12 years and you're gonna say something different, right? You guys know what I mean? You will get to a point where you're like, all right, that's it.
You get worn out.
You get worn out. Worn out. And you're like, get going. But regardless of what you're gonna do, is you're gonna be able to follow through on it. That's the idea. Fair enough? What's that?
That's the hard part.
Well, it's the hard part, especially if you do something that you think you should do rather than what you're sure you can do. What happens a lot is people try to work somebody else's plan. So they come and see somebody like me and I tell them, the Notorious, my friend, says this, and he's a good dude and he's not trying to be an idiot when he says it, but he is an idiot when he says it. Kick him out and don't give him anything, not even a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, until they're ready to go to rehab, all right? He doesn't even know what he's saying when he says that. Do you follow me? That is not how this works. But you do probably want to start figuring out, like, where can I make an impact? And then let me give you some suggestions on what the ask would be. Like, what do you want your loved one to do? At the top of the list, is go to rehab, get clean and sober, stop using, and live happily ever after, right? Okay. That's not always going to happen, guys. And if you really want to get honest about it, if you look at the research around recovery, only about 13% of folks cite going to rehab as a major reason they got better. Okay, so it's not necessary. Follow me? It's not necessary. It is something that typically is looked at because it gives the family a break and it's a very tangible thing.
You're saying it's not necessary to get better to go to rehab?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. It's necessary for the business model of rehabs. All right? And if you talk to them, they'll tell you it is. And there are some situations that are much more dangerous than others. And that there are some people who, that's the only way it'll happen. They need to be behaviorally contained, put in a box where nobody can get to them and nobody can get out. But only about 13% would say that's what it was. More people actually figured out in the community, guys. They figured out, because, and you want to know really what they do, is they bounce around from thing to thing. They do AA meetings, NA meetings, favor meetings, therapists. They bounce around. This worked. I hate that group. I'm never going back there. Then they go over here. I hate. And what happens is over time, it gets better. It gets better, and then they sustain it. Okay, that's the more typical kind of pattern. Yes, ma'am.
What if, like, for example, my daughter who's been in and out of recovery since she's been 13 and she's 24, and she just sent me a picture of how horrible she looks right now, and that I should go pick her up and move her because she's on the street. I have no help from family. They will support me, but they're not going to support this situation anymore. So she wants help now because she's practically basically going to be homeless.
Yeah.
So, and I can't put her in my home because I have a person in recovery that lives there that wants to stay in recovery, and it will not happen if the both of them coincide.
Mm-hmm.
Now I am picking a husband over a daughter, but the daughter is no longer in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this is a topic for after the meeting, but I want to help her, but I don't want to take her on her situation again. I've been doing this for 10 years.
So the thing is, you're absolutely justified in not getting her. What you want is you want to not get her and not feel guilty about it.
Yes.
And that's impossible because you're a human being and not a cyborg, right? Yeah. And so you guys get this? You're 100% justified in what you're doing, and you know you are. So, but the thing is, we don't want to feel that way that you're going to feel tonight. But what I'm telling you, you're not doing anything wrong. And it's okay to feel guilty. It's okay to feel guilty. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent, a bad husband, bad wife, bad person. It's a feeling that's almost inevitable, guys. And it would be actually weirder if you didn't. Do you guys get that? Like, it would kind of be strange if you didn't feel that way. You know, what you did is really good, because what you do is you come, you get around a notorious expert like me. In your case, you have the added benefit of coming and getting like really good advice, but no, you go and you get advice, right? You go and you talk to somebody. You could probably put a list of 2 or 3 people together. And what are you doing when you say that? You're saying it out loud to somebody. This is why it's so important they're not a judgmental person. You say it out loud. You already kind of know the answer, but you feel just a bit better understanding that you've done anything. Because here's the deal. If you really want to get real about it, the problem with addiction is, it isn't that people get to a chronic state where you're like, I don't know how this will get better. I don't know if this will ever get better. Because we know other diseases have that happen too, right? Some people die of cancer in a hospice. The difference is they're there and they're in front of you and you know everything's been done. The problem with addiction is this continuous thought in the back of your head that I should go get her, or I shouldn't go get her, or maybe I should, or I shouldn't, or maybe I should.
And if I do, what do I do?
And what I'm here to tell you is if you're here tonight and you're trying to figure it out, and this is where you're at, you're good to go, man. And also understand that you doing that actually increases the likelihood that she ultimately gets there. How many people here remember what it's like to be 24? Okay?
Oh, good Lord.
You remember? Holy cow. I'm just kidding.
Wow.
No, because here's the other part of it. You gotta remember though, even though addiction is involved, okay, you're still 24.
Yeah.
Or you're still 18, or you're still 18. And you gotta remember, like, developmentally and stuff like that, you know, you're just sort of doing what you're doing. And, you know, you are somewhat invincible. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like the deal, and I'm just going to run with it. You guys are fighting, we are fighting an uphill battle with young adults. I've said this before, excuse my language, but what happens is at like age 16, the asshole fairy sneaks in their room and sprinkles dust on them. And they stay that way till they're like, what, 28? Some people in the back are like, this guy is really, really messed up. Like, you know, but teenagers are difficult without drugs. That is a fact of life. They are very difficult. They are by definition designed to push your buttons. They are by definition designed to take risks.
Well, and if you have a mental health condition.
Or an addiction, yeah. So you have to understand, like, you're right on with it. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. It's
Yes.
not really on topic. I have a son who's 33, who's kind of reached the end of his, I don't know, threshold, whatever. He's used up every single penny. He's sold all of his guitars, which that's his life. He's stolen thousands of dollars from us, and he has no transportation now because we've taken the card insurance and whatnot. So he's finally agreed to, he's on methadone, is that what it is?
Yes.
Yeah, for about a week. And he's agreed to go to rehab when, I guess he's detoxed.
Okay.
How long does it take to be detoxed?
So they'll have to go to rehab to get detoxed.
No, oh, well, I thought,
Well, unless they're going to taper him down.
yeah, they're tapering
Oh,
him down.
okay.
Because they won't take him,
Okay. So how long has he been on? He's only been on for a week.
maybe almost 2 weeks.
So it shouldn't take that long if it's only been that. So I can't tell you the exact length of
He's
time.
he was on 30 and now he's on 25.
Yeah, he'll get there relatively quick. The next week will go faster.
Cause I'm just worried that it's gonna be drug out and drug out and drug out, and we've already got he's already said he's gonna go. I just don't want him to go back on it now and find some other way.
Well,
to
if
use
they're
it.
taking him down, he's going to go. Because he's still gonna go through some other withdrawal even when he goes, and he's gonna wanna be somewhere in order to deal with it. If he sticks, you'll know whether he's gonna go or not, because if he keeps coming down, that means he's gonna go somewhere. And if it's only been 2 weeks and it's only 30 milligrams, he'll get there relatively quickly. He'll still detox though. It just won't be as bad. The facility will handle.
I just wanna make sure he goes, I can't take him home anymore.
Well, and that part of it is your self-preservation, his long-term kind of solution. This is where though, like, if you start, I think we said this too, like, so the deal is like, a person goes to rehab. Even if he goes to rehab, you still want to be wrapping your mind around this, because we also know that that's not necessarily a magic solution, right?
Right.
So you're still there. It's not a destination kind of. We got there. It still involves what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? What are the things that we have influence over? What are the things that we can do? What are the things that we can't do? It's an ongoing process, all the time, continuously. I don't want to say for the rest of the person's life. It stabilizes, but there's a great deal of time between even after rehab. So the deal becomes get here, talk to people, work through your plan, try to figure out how you're going to wrap your mind around it, get the support you need so that you don't need to feel guilty around this. You guys are all feeling it tonight. Like a lot of folks in here are feeling what I'm talking about. It's the decisions that you have to start making around this are going to come sooner or later. The more proactive you are and the more you think them through. Be careful in your situation, ma'am. I'm not saying rehab won't work, but be careful that you think that that's going to be.
I don't necessarily.
But it's what he needs right now.
Well, and not only that, it's just, it's killing us living at home. I have to lock everything up.
One of the most common,
stressful.
well, what I'll tell you is one of the most common things and one of the most straightforward things is when people start stealing your stuff, you should ask them to leave. And that's coming from somebody who doesn't really tell people to do that. But when I hardly ever say that, guys. But when people start, there's two things when they start stealing your stuff and they start threatening you or physically hurt you in any kind of way, or it starts to become that scene, there's no room for that really. And that's when you really got to think about, you're going to have to get out of here. Yeah. Well, and there's a process there too. You have to think that through. It's very, very, very unpredictable and individualized. Every single thing that we talked about tonight, we talked about in generalities. It's not, I can't say anything where you can all say, oh, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. You have got to look at your individual situations. You know yourself better than anyone. This whole idea of like honoring what you can do and what you can't do is so important. If you can't ask a person to leave or you're just not ready to go there with the conversation, don't go there. Think about where else you can have some influence. Mary Kay?
Can I say something really quick?
Yes.
As far as guilt is concerned, the 24-year-old that says, I'm going to be homeless, can you come and get me? There are things that we can do as a mother and a parent that I've learned from coming here. In other words, give her the toll-free number for the 24-hour hotline. Tell her, I can help you by contacting some homeless shelters for you or finding some places. Perhaps you can't make all these phone calls, but it helped me to be able to do things like that when I knew that I couldn't do.
You've been around the block with this, so I can tell. So she knows that.
Right.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
Just
like
to be able to give them something, like I can't give you money, but I'll buy you a sandwich.
Well, and a lot of times when a person's in active addiction, okay, and you're there, what happens is, I call it a depth chart. We go down the depth chart of people. We start with our mom. You're killing me, you gotta come get me. Okay, she won't. I don't know, boyfriend, dad, friends. You follow what I'm saying? It doesn't stop with you. You're not the only one she's calling. And it really, truly is kind of a situation where how do you judge the genuineness of the person, if you give them and you empower them with the information, that is an ideal situation, and you don't have to get yourself kind of caught up in that decision-making process.
And then I know I've done something.
Yes.
So it lessens my guilt.
Yeah.
Of not picking them up.
I think the thing that we can kind of like leave this, and we'll kind of close this thing out, would be to really be thinking about, what would be, you want to do something different, right? You want to have something different in your situation, in your dynamic. And sometimes that's a big thing, like he's going to rehab. But often it's not. It's here's what I can change and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give him $20 every Friday, and I'm not doing that. Or we've been fighting every night, and I'm opting out of the fight. I'm opting. You get like you just start. If you can't do the big stuff, you start to think, what can I do? And then you come back and you talk to people more, and you talk to a therapist, you talk to me, and you talk to each other, or you talk to somebody else who's gone through this, or one of our family coaches, and you say, now I can do X. You don't have to figure this out tonight. I know we want it to be figured out tonight, but you don't have to. I wish there was an easier answer. I mean, I really do. I feel like I stand up here sometimes and I'm like, there's got to be something more than this, Rich. And I think ultimately what the solution is, guys, is that you guys are able to contact a professional agency that goes and deals with your loved one. This is how it should work, especially if they're under 26. And I'll leave it after this. If you're under 26 and you're on your parents' insurance, your parents should be able to contact Rich Jones's treatment agency and say, my son's name is Joe Smith. He lives at 123 Main Street. Here, as far as I know, are the issues. Have at it. And I go to Joe Smith's house. I'm like, Rich Jones, nice to meet you. Everybody I tell that to say, he'll never let you in. He'll let me in every single time. I'm telling you, we did it. We did it for mental health. It happens in mental health all the time. It doesn't happen in addiction because the world, they say, you don't do that for drug addicts. You guys follow? It has nothing to do with actual effectiveness. Then you guys, you would know that the person, there should be a place in Buford where you can call right now and be like, I just got a call from my daughter. See, do you guys see how that would change the outcomes? And that's actually the answer for parents. Right now, we're working through this fragmented, fractured system that is just not acceptable, and it's inappropriate, and it's inhumane. But we have got to have real honest conversations about the cards that we're dealt right now. And that's going to be harder. You're going to have to do this stuff. And come back here again next week, and we will talk through this again, and we will talk a little bit more about other ways to deal with stress. Find other people that you can talk to and other people that help you through that. And pray for them to put me in charge of the world. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. This is an open meeting. Yep.
Do you think that would turn it? I mean, you know.
I think especially if I'm going to be here and I'm doing a lecture, I don't think you should bring it if it's not a lecture, but if it's like the education on the brain and stuff like that, that would be good. Yeah. There's also the resource, I've told you guys before, youturn.net is a online educational platform that has a lot of these groups on there, okay?
Are you gonna be here next week?
Who? As far as I know I am. I was just looking for my phone. All right. We're going to close this thing with the Serenity Prayer. We get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease and for the family members brought into this no choice of their own. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And then up here is the call card if anybody needs to